I'm going to turn a piece of wood that's over 300 years old. Hi, I'm Kent and welcome to Turn a Wood Bowl. Today we have this beautiful log that is over 300 years old. Now, I'm going to tell you more about this piece as we go through the turning, but needless to say, this is a pretty special piece of wood. Now, honestly, I love trees, and every piece of wood I put on the lathe is special, and I love showcasing that. This one is particularly special, and I got to be honest with you, this is making me a little bit nervous. I've only got one of these logs, and this thing feels significant. There's a weight to it, a weight in its presence, just the significance of it. Now, it actually has physical weight too, because it's loaded with resin or pitch. Resin and pitch are basically the same thing. It's a liquid that is inside the tree that's thicker. It's the sticky stuff that you run across if you're around a conifer. It only occurs in conifer trees. That sticky substance can be called resin or pitch, and quite honestly, we don't know exactly how the tree uses it. There is so much we don't know about trees, and the more you read about trees, actually here's some great books about trees. If you like trees as much as I do, you're going to want to check these out, and I'll put links in the description below for these books. But you realize the more that we think we know about trees, there are still quite a few things that we don't know. One of the things we don't know is what the tree uses the resin exactly for. We know that it's loaded with nutrients and different elements that the tree has provided to it, and it's actually produced within the tree. But we don't know if it's just a food source or if it's storage or protection or some combination of all of those things. But this tree is loaded with resin, and it's going to make the turning pretty interesting. It should turn and cut very smoothly, but that resin or pitch can build up on the surface of the bowl gouge, and with the heat of the bowl gouge, it has the ability to build up and create a residue. So I'm actually going to probably need to sharpen pretty frequently just to get that pitch or resin off the bowl gouge. Even though the bowl gouge really isn't dull yet, I'm probably going to have to sharpen pretty frequently just to clean up the bowl gouge. So I'm going to take a closer look at this and try to decide exactly how I want to turn this. And I'm probably going to do something a little unconventional with this particular design and this particular layout, because I really want to showcase all of these hundreds of growth rings on this tree. So let's dive in and get started with this beautiful piece of super old wood. Since this is such a special piece of wood, I really want to take my time and plan out exactly what I'm going to do. So I'm trying to find an equal distance on each side of this pith area so that the bowl is balanced when I'm turning it. And I can see that while that was equal, the top of it's a little lopsided. So I'm going to rotate around a little bit and see if this is equal. It's about 5 inches from the pith out. See, that's the curve that I also want the top of the bowl to be balanced as well. And I think this angle is going to be a little bit better. So I'm going to redraw this. This is going to be the center axis or the horizontal plane. This will be the same plane as the tabletop that this will sit on. And this will be the center axis coming out of the bowl. Now what I'm going to do is I'm not going to cut this log at the pith. I'm going to cut below the pith. I want the foot and the bottom of the bowl to be below the pith because I want that pith to be visible on the sides of this bowl so that you can really see what's happening with all these grain lines. You can see there's a section right there that I cut off that was a little, it had been cut a little weird as far as an angle with the chainsaw, so I cut off that slab, and that's the piece that I have right beside me there on the lathe. I'm going to sand that piece up, and I'm going to take a photo of it, and I'm going to count these rings here in just a little bit. Now I'm checking both sides of this to make sure that that's pretty even, and I'm feeling pretty good with this. I think I've got it where I need it to be. I'm kind of eyeballing up and down both sides to make sure I've got it right where I want it. And then I'm going to make a cut line right about here. And then I'm going to take this over to the bandsaw and I'm going to slice this open. I'm a little nervous about this because if this isn't done right, it would be a huge waste of a log. The bottom of this log is relatively flat, so it's staying stable there, but I really need to make sure that I just go very slow and steady. I actually just put a new blade on this as well, so it's cutting very smoothly, which is exactly what I need. And I seem to have hit my marks pretty well there, so I'm happy about that. It's looking good, and there's our line. Now, I'm going to mount this with a drive center, a 4-spur drive center, and I need to clear a little bit of this area at the top so that that spur can really get in there and hold on to the wood. Now, at first I thought this was a bark layer or maybe a cambium layer that was just under the bark, but what I'm discovering as I'm turning this is that while that is definitely showing the texture of the bark and the cambium layer are gone, and this tree has been basically eroding with the same pattern as the bark itself. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to balance this out. Now the reason I'm using that 4-spur drive center is I want the flexibility to be able to move this later, and I'm going to be doing that as you'll see here in a second. So I'm going to use my 5/8 inch 55-degree bevel swept back bowl gouge. This is my go-to tool for removing material. And I want to start taking down these corners. It's a little tricky doing this because I'm only getting a little bit of cutting action going on at the corners of the blank as it comes around, and it will get a little bit better as we get into more of the material, as you see here. But what you really want to do is you want to maintain down pressure on the tool rest so that you have good stability of the tool and it's not getting bounced around. It's a little tricky on the edge there because the bottom of this, or the face of this bowl, has a high spot and a low spot, and that acts like a ramp, and it will catch the tool and throw it off its path there initially. I just want to keep the nose of the bowl gouge pointed in the direction of the cut. And we're just going to slowly remove material here. There's no rush. I don't want to be doing this quickly and ripping out material. I'm kind of taking a look at the sides here and seeing how this is matching up with the lines that I drew. At this point, I'm just trying to get material off of the corners so that I can really start sizing up this piece and determining how I want to make any minor adjustments to it. You can see the fibers coming off as just pretty much just in-grain dust. I'm not getting any shavings from this. It gives you some indication of how different this is. This wood is literally being held together with a thick coat of resin. Okay, so I'm going to use this tool to determine if the two edges are meeting, and they're not quite meeting. I do want to take enough time to adjust this. Now I'm going to make a very small adjustment there, and that's going to be enough to balance out those two top pieces. If you don't do this, what's going to happen is you're going to have one side that's going to be higher than the other, and while that seems like it's not that big of a deal, it can look pretty awkward once it's sitting on a table, and I'd rather not have that. So we can make that minor adjustment right now by adjusting the tailstock, and that's why I'm using this 4-spur drive center to turn the initial portion of this bowl. So I'm going to continue rounding out the shape of the bowl. We're not down to the sides yet, but I'm going to take a moment here and I'm going to clean the face of this bowl and get it ready for the tenon and the shoulder. Now I've got to thank Chuck Walton. Chuck got me this piece of wood. He sent it to me. It was is pretty fascinating. This came from his family's farm or property in Colorado. And this tree had been sitting dead on this property since the 1960s, early 1960s. And just recently, the tree had to come down because it was in danger of falling on a building or something. So they cut the tree down and started looking at it and realized, wow, this is really old. And Chuck had told me that this piece, he counted 360 growth rings on this, which is just amazing. 360 years ago. And on top of that, this tree has been dead for over 60 years. So the center pith of this tree is potentially 400 years or more old, which is completely crazy. Now, we're not quite sure what the species is. This could be a pine or a juniper. It's obviously a very slow-growing tree that was growing in Colorado in the mountains. So the growth period for that region is relatively short because it's not warm there all the time. It's a lot of cold times, so it doesn't grow as quick. Now, I'm also making sure that I'm stopping and tightening the tailstock plenty of times, because as I'm turning, the teeth in the drive center will dig in a little bit and they will loosen up. So you want to make sure you're tightening the tailstock as you're turning, and be aware of that as you're turning. So this tree would have a very short growth period in the spring and summer and a long dormant period in winter. So it stands to reason that it would grow slowly, but the age of it is absolutely incredible. So I'm just honored to be able to turn a piece like this and have the opportunity to see it, let alone turn it, I guess. Super cool. And it is a little bit unnerving because, like I said, I don't want to mess this up. And right now, this is really a very unusual turning compared to all of my other turnings, because this species is just so different than everything else that I normally turn. It is literally like turning a very dense wheel of cheese. It has a soft consistency because of the resin, and the grain lines really aren't affecting the cut too much. A lot of times in certain species you can feel that end grain come around because it's a pretty significant impact on the bowl gouge, but this seems to be cutting very evenly, and it's almost like a continuous dense material, like a solid block of wax or cheese or something. It's just completely different than most things that I turn. It's hard to imagine a tree living for hundreds of years. It's just hard to wrap your head around. Now, at this point, I haven't looked at the actual rings and tried counting them myself. I do have that cross section that I cut off of the initial log, and I'm going to sand that down and really take a close look at it here in a bit. Now I'm backing up and taking a peek there at the overall shape of this. I have the tenon and the shoulder created, and that establishes the bottom of the bowl. So now I essentially need to connect the bottom of the bowl up to the top rim and put the two together. I want to go through this side material, this bark, but after I looked at it, I realized this is not bark, and it's not the cambium layer. This is actually the deterioration of the tree after the bark has left. It's almost as if there's an acid or an acidic quality of something is basically worked into the tree using those patterns of the bark. So it looks like bark, but it's not bark. Now I'm going to move the tool rest over, and I'm going to go ahead and remove enough material to get down to those sides. So I still have those flat sides to deal with there, But I don't want to remove too much material because it's going to make the piece that much smaller. So I'm making light passes. You can see here initially it looks like I'm almost not even cutting. And each time I bring the tool back, I'm inserting it just a hair deeper so it makes a slight cut. I don't want to get too aggressive here and rush this, because we will be ripping out ingrains if we do. All right, there's the cut that I'm making, and it's still got quite a ways to go. The tool is showing signs of dulling, so I'm going to go ahead and sharpen that up. Now, I've got an online sharpening course that also deals with the shaping of the bowl gouges and all of the other tools. So if you are interested in using a 55-degree bevel swept back bowl gouge, you don't have to buy any special gouge. You can go get a regular bowl gouge, preferably one with a parabolic flute. Most of them are made nowadays with a parabolic flute. And in that course, I will show you exactly how to shape the front profile to match what I'm doing here. Now, the reason I'm making a cut from left to right here is because that's the supported grain cut, or the supported grain direction. And that's really important to know. I have a video all about the supported grain cut. You're going to want to check that out. Very important, especially if you are making smooth cuts but you're getting torn out material. It's probably because you have a non-supported grain cut direction that you're making with your tools. Once you understand how that works, it makes a world of difference. So check out that video. So I'm working down this surface until I get down to that continuous round shape and get those flat sides removed. But I'm going to take my time and check it, because you can sneak up on it a lot quicker than you think. And I also need to take a little time to move that tool rest in so I get good support there. And with this particular piece, I don't want to get aggressive and waste any material. I'm sitting here realizing at this moment that this piece of wood is older than the United States of America. That's pretty interesting. I know for us Americans that our history seems like nothing compared to Europe and that, which has thousands of years of history that are well established, but it's still relatively significant. And it's somewhat humbling to be able to turn a piece of wood that's been on earth for so long. Now I wanted to show you this angle because this is the angle that I'm seeing. I'm looking at the top of the bowl while I'm turning, and I'm watching that profile. I'm watching the shape occur, and this is a little unnerving because I'm making a deeper cut than the bottom portion of the bowl, but that's okay. I'll straighten out the bottom portion in just a minute and pull that in. I just need to get that flat side down. Because both of these flat sides are almost the same size, that means that I had the center positioning of the blank pretty good, which is good. It's also a way to waste a lot of material is if you don't have that centered up well. You take off a lot of material on one side and then you have to reduce it all the way down to match the low material on the other side. Okay, so there we've reached the bottom. Now I have to continue shaping the bottom portion of the bowl to match up with the top portion. Making a top pass here, and I'm going to merge all of those other shortcuts. Don't want to do it all in one shot. I'm going to use a scraping cut here to just quickly remove some material at the base of the bowl and get the curve of the shape that I want. Now what I was mentioning is I'm looking across the top of the bowl at the top profile, just like you can see at the top of this piece. I'm looking at that top profile while I'm turning. I set the tool up in its path, and then I watch that profile to make sure that I'm cutting with the curve that I want. It's getting there. Obviously, we have that path, that high path on the center, but that'll be addressed here in just a moment. Always want to keep the tool rest positioned so that it gives you the most support. I'm going to start taking down that high pass in the center here and blend the bottom portion of the bowl to the top portion of the bowl. Now, this is important to keep in mind. If you see some well-known turners that just do a quick little pass and boom, their outside of their bowl's done, that's great. And that's fantastic if you're a production turner and you've got 1 or 2 species of wood and you turn 50 or 100 bowls a week. That's no big deal. You can do that very easily. If you're working on pieces like this where they're one-offs, this is a one-of-a-kind bowl, obviously, because of the tree species. I've got a high spot there that needs to be dealt with, and I still need to deal with where that's blending, but I'm much closer now, so it's looking pretty good. Now I'm going to use a shear scrape to fine-tune these high spots and merge and blend these areas together. And that's what I really wanted to talk to you about, is that you do not have to make some incredible pass from the bottom up to the rim all in one shot. You can work on each section individually and then use the shear scrape to blend them together. I have a video all about shear scraping and how to do it and how to execute the shear scrape properly. And this is a great technique to use to blend areas together and to fine-tune high spots in that without making a push cut. When you make a push cut, you have the chance of getting a little more aggressive and taking away too much material. So the shear scrape is great for this. You can see how I'm just lightly shaving away material, and you can see the shavings coming off of there. This is actually one of the first times I actually have shavings coming off versus just dust. Now, I shear scraped this pretty thoroughly, but I'm not convinced, or I'm not happy with the overall shape of this, and I actually am going to use a push cut to make the last pass on this, but I'm going to do this in sections. I went back to the sharpening station and sharpened the gouge to make sure that it's incredibly sharp and ready to go. That's very important. Now the cut that I'm doing is a very light cut. This is a great opportunity for the curved tool rest that I have, and it happens that this bowl profile seems to match this tool rest very well. So I can use the tool rest as somewhat of a guide to help me around this bowl and make a really clean cutting pass. So by reducing my pace, I'm able to allow the tool to have plenty of time to make a nice clean cut. This is really important to understand. If I were to push the gouge quickly, I'm going to have tool marks, and I probably won't have a nice smooth surface because I'm not going to keep it on course as well. So I'm allowing this just to take very lightly cut and not get too aggressive with this. It's interesting, you can see the voids going by where the air from the shape of the outside of the bark comes by. You can see the shavings coming out of the bowl gouge, and then they don't, and then they do. It goes on and off. But look at that texture. That's the cut I'm looking for. Now, I'm cutting from left to right here for a couple reasons. It's a supported grain cut, but it also will help prevent knocking off that outside material. If I were to go from right to left, there's a good chance I'm going to knock off the bark material on the outside or the top of this bowl. So I'm making very light passes here. I want to sneak up on that. I want to merge that. Now I'm also making this a closed rimmed bowl. That means the top of the rim is slightly narrower, not very much, but slightly narrower than the widest part of this bowl. And now we have those edges blended together. Now, I'm happy with the shape of this. I'm going to go ahead and shape the dovetail for the tenon and get this ready to mount on the 4-jaw chuck. It's really important to take your time getting that outside just the way you want it. So I'm going to take the drive spur out and put my 4-jaw chuck on. This is a 5-inch 4-jaw chuck. You can see how well that tenon seats in the chuck. It's very important to make your tenons just right. Look at that wood grain. Now this made me want to take a moment and look at this closer. So I took that cross-section piece and with my macro lens on my camera, I photographed multiple sections and stitched these together so I can really zoom in and see all the detail of these grains. Here you can see the varying grain patterns inside this. So then I started thinking, oh, wait a minute, let me count these off. So I marked them. There's 50, there's 100, there's 150, there's 200, there's 250, there's 300, there's 350, there's 400, there's 450, and at least 10 more. 460 years old. Now here's something interesting. Look at this. That bark is not bark. See how the grain is cut off there? That is not how a tree grows. The bark layer, the outside layer, should be conforming to the same size or pattern as the bark, and this wasn't. Meaning that what we're seeing that looks like bark there is actually the erosion that's cut down into that. So that means that many more layers of grains were removed as well. So 460 is just the beginning. There's a good chance this tree was at least 500 years old 60 years ago when it was dead. I'm just trying to wrap my head around this. So this tree was growing before Christopher Columbus discovered America. That's like staggering to me. Wow. Well, I knew it was old, but I didn't realize it was this old. It's potentially 500 years old, not 300 years old. That's crazy. Okay, so I get this question a lot. Why don't you use your coring equipment and core out the center from this? Well, it's a little tricky to answer, but basically you don't get a really great piece from coring typically. And this is going to be a really small piece, but I can't bear to just waste what's in here. It won't be a significant bowl or bowl blank to come out of here, but at least it'll be something. The curve and the way this tool is set up, you really need to be cutting bowl blanks specifically for the purpose of coring them so that you can maximize the potential yield that you'll get from them. If you're not doing that, it's a little more difficult to get a good piece out of it, as you'll see here. Now, I don't want to get right up to the edge of this bowl because I don't want to damage the edge of the bowl that I'm trying to create, this nice big bowl. If I try to make another bowl from inside that's maybe a little bit bigger, I could damage this outside bowl and that would defeat the whole purpose. So I'm just going to extract a portion here that I'll be able to save and use for later, but I don't think it's going to be really that significant. But again, since this piece is so historically unique, there's no way that I'm going to let that go to waste and just turn it into shaving. So I'm going to at least cut this one little portion out of here. I have an article on my website all about using this coring system. This is a coring system from One Way Tools, so you want to check that out if you're interested in doing this. There are the pieces broken free, and we could take it out. See, it's not a huge piece. I mean, it's nice to have it, but it's not going to be that significant. All right, so I'm going to set that aside and get the coring equipment out of the way. If this bowl were a little bit wider, and if I had not decided to create a closed rim on the exterior, then I would have been able to core out a little bit larger piece from the inside. But again, that's not what I'm trying to do. You can very easily have two mediocre or poorly executed bowls trying to do this. Instead, I need to focus on this bowl and make sure that it's exactly what I want it to be. Okay, so I'm going to establish the wall thickness here. I want to do that right away because I want to determine what the wall thickness will be all the way down the inside of this bowl. Now, I'm not going to make this super thin because I don't know this species well enough. I don't know how long this tree has sat dead. I don't know if that resin's going to hold it together. I don't know if those big top sections of those wings are going to break apart, and obviously I don't want that to happen. So I'm going to take my time and remove the material and work down the side. I want to show you this angle so you can see that I have the bevel of the bowl gouge parallel to the exterior of the bowl as I'm working down the inside and clearing that material. That's really important, and it's actually pretty easy to do when you have a live edge piece like this. Because of that open air or the sides that are open on the bowl, you can actually see down into the bowl while it's turning, as you can see here. And you can see how it's thicker down at this portion, and that's exactly the way you want it. And we just slowly remove material until that wall thickness becomes the same thickness as the material above it. So I'm just matching up all of these surfaces, making the bevel parallel to the exterior of the bowl, and that will maintain your wall thickness all the way down. There you can see it was a little bit thicker. Now I'm bringing it to about the same thickness as the top portion. And it's a good idea to stop frequently and check. It's feeling really good. So that's interesting. That's not bark, that's an erosion. And look at that. You can see that. You can see how sharp those edges are, and they're holding on, which is good. I'm a little concerned that because it is essentially dead wood, I'm wondering if any of this is going to go flying off, and I hope not. Here you can see from a little bit different angle that how I'm working that inside of that wall, just taking off a little portion. It's really sharp edges. I need to make sure that I don't get caught on any of those. So yeah, so this is absolutely incredible. This piece is, we know this actual section is at least 460 years, or it has 460 years of growth on it. The other thing that's interesting is that this is higher up on the tree, meaning the base of the tree potentially was wider with more growth rings in it. It would seem as if they would have the same amount of growth rings, but with the erosion of the exterior of this, it's hard to tell. I would love to know what species this is. If you've got any idea what this might be, it's obviously in the pine or juniper family. Very slow growing, old growth conifer from the Colorado Rocky Mountain area. It's just absolutely amazing. Now I need to sharpen my tool again. You would think with a material as smooth as resin that you wouldn't need to sharpen as much, but what happens is resin has sugars in it. Well, if you've ever cooked with sugar, you know how fast sugar can burn and how you need to pay attention to it at all times. Well, same thing's happening here. The sugars that are in that resin are heating up on the bowl gouge and creating a surface. They're actually attaching themselves and dulling the surface and gumming it up a little bit. Now, the CBN wheels don't seem to have much of an issue with it. Perhaps the friction of the tool on there keeps them clean, but everything so far has been just fine. It is super important to maintain sharpness with your gouge as you're turning, especially when you get down to the final surface like I am here on the inside of this bowl. You want to take your time and just slowly let the tool do the cutting. Don't use too much force here. Again, I don't know how strong these walls are going to be, and hopefully this piece stays together. I would hate to lose it at this point. So I have the walls, the exterior walls, down to about their finished thickness. I just need to make some passes here to clean up the last little bit to finish that curve on the inside. It's interesting that the intervals between the strobe effect of the lights and the camera created a weird effect there. You could see it for a moment, then you couldn't. Now I'm using a piece of tape here to mark my tool rest. I'm using my inside curved tool rest now, and I'll have a link for that in the description below, as well as all the other tools that I'm using in this video. But I'm using that mark just to give myself a little bit of a reminder not to go past that piece of tape, because if I do, I might put my hand in the way, and because there's so many sharp edges here, that wouldn't be so great. Now I'm switching over to my secret weapon. This is my micro bevel bowl gouge. The micro bevel bowl gouge allows me to basically insert the tool almost straight in, where most other tools, even my 55-degree bevel swept back bowl gouge, are a little tricky to get into a deep bowl like this. This tool can do it. Now, if you're working with something like a 40-40 that has a 40-degree front bevel, there's absolutely no way you can put that tool in the bottom of a bowl like this. You have to have something like this micro bevel bowl gouge. Now, if you're interested in creating a micro bevel bowl gouge, well, you can make your own from any bowl gouge, and we go over all the details in the tool sharpening course. The tool sharpening course probably should be renamed to tool sharpening and tool shaping course, because I show you guys exactly how to shape all your tools there too, including the micro bevel bowl gouge. You can see that I'm essentially bringing the entire center bottom portion down all at one time so that I can merge it in with the curve that's been established on the inside walls that we did down the side. And that's exactly what I'm doing here, is I'm picking up the areas that were last cut and then bringing that down into the bottom portion of the bowl. I'm being a little hesitant. I don't like going up that high on the bowl typically, because those walls are not supported. I do have them relatively thick, and this is a pretty beefy bowl, but you just want to be careful. You never want to go back up to the rim. Up at the rim, there's just too much movement right now, and that's a good way to cause an explosion, or what would appear to be an explosion. A lot of people do that. They'll get to this point where they're almost done, and then they think, well, wait, let me change the shape of the rim a little bit. And because that rim is not supported and flapping around, touching a tool to it that's anchored to the tool rest is going to make it disintegrate, and that is not what you want. So stay away from that rim once you're at this portion of the bowl. So I'm going to make the final passes at the bottom of the bowl here to finish up the curve. And I think we're looking pretty good here. I don't know if you noticed in there too, when I was showing you the close-ups of that cross section, there were a couple periods of time where there was a lot of water. There was a lot of growth, and year after year, very wide rings compared to other years. And then there were spans of 40, 50 years that were super tight, meaning that it didn't grow as much for whatever reason. It could have been cold, it could have been water, or lack of water rather. I'm going to use a jam chuck here. I'm using actually just a chunk of wood that I have that's scrap wood, and I'm rounding off the front so that it's nice and trued up and it will rotate properly. Here are those growth rings I was mentioning. See how wide those are? Look at that one. There could have potentially been amazing floods or a tremendous amount of water, but then look at how tight they get years later. There's almost hardly any noticeable growth there. Anyway, it's absolutely fascinating to think about that you can use a piece of wood like this to see what happened in a particular location as far as the climate. Absolutely incredible. And what was interesting, there was a couple periods of time where there was a lot of growth and very little growth. So it makes you wonder about the rhythms of the earth and the weather patterns that we have and everything that we think we know so well. It makes you wonder how much we really know. Okay, so I've reversed this bowl and mounted it in the jam chuck, and I'm going to clean up this shoulder and turn that into the foot of the bowl. I'm just shaping the outside of the foot, and I'm just being very delicate here to make sure I don't go too far. I'm going to get in here with my spindle detail gouge, and I'm going to clean up that corner. Now there's a little bit of a high spot on the bowl itself. I'm just going to lightly shave that away. And then I'm going to come back from the other angle to clean up that corner very lightly. And then I'm going to take my 1/2 inch 55 degree bevel swept back bowl gouge, and I'm going to lightly shear scrape that and blend those surfaces together. Just want to go very delicately here. It's just the bottom wing that's touching and shaving. It's essentially like a shave that's happening. Very light amount of material is being removed. You want to take your time with this. There's no rush. Remember, the exterior of the bowl is the bowl. It's what we see, it's what we feel. So you want to take your time and make sure that this is done exactly the way you want. Now I'm going to level off the foot and make sure that's nice and horizontal so it'll sit flat on a tabletop. And then I'll start shaping the inside of the foot and remove that material. Now I need to keep in mind this is a relatively large piece, and this is not something that I turn on a regular basis. This is a species that's stable, but it's a softer wood, so I need to make sure that nub in the center is not taking on too much pressure. Now I'm turning with a completely open flute here. I'm making a very light cut, and I'm being very careful. If I get too much material in there, I'm going to get a catch, and I'm going to send this thing flying and most likely rip off one of the wings on the bowl as it tries to clear that jam chuck. So you want to be really careful doing that cut. I'm going to continue the curve inside the bottom of the foot to match the curve of the bowl. And just nibble this away. Now I'm going to switch over to my spindle detail gouge, and I'm going to continue making that nub narrower, and I'm watching that nub very closely. I got a little knockout there material. I'm not going to stop the lathe. The torque from stopping it and starting again would be enough to break that nub, so instead I'm going to cut it off right here. I'm going to apply forward pressure while I'm turning off the lathe. You can see that little notch that popped off there. And that'll just come right off, and I'll sand that smooth. Wow. I don't know what to say. This is absolutely amazing. Look at that wood grain. Look at the texture of the exterior of this. Absolutely stunning, stunning piece to look at. And to think there's over 460 growth rings that we can see on this bowl. Who knows what the actual age of this tree was, but it's hard to wrap my head around, honestly. Wow. Nature is absolutely amazing. Thanks again, Chuck, for sending this. Greatly appreciate that. Well, here it is, and I love it. This is not sanded, and I'm not going to apply finish to it because it is so full of resin that it really doesn't need a finish. Now, if you turn something, or if you turn on a regular basis wood that is very full of resin and you have a particular finish technique that you like, let me know. Leave a comment below. I'd like to know what you're doing with that. But for right now, I'm not going to do anything with this. I'm going to let this dry and see what happens. There are some tool marks in here, but I don't care. I can see the pith and I can see all these radiating grain lines, and that was the whole idea. Now, this is not typical. Normally with a side grain mounted bowl, we'll cut the log right in half at the pith, but instead I really wanted to be able to see all of these grains and all of these in-grain lines going out from the pith outward. So what I did is I cut the log below the pith, which gave me the pith to be in the side of the bowl. Because this is so old and it's most likely gone through all of the tension and all of the decompression that is going to, and it's loaded with resin, which is really holding this thing together quite well. I'm not really too worried about the pith area. I think it's going to be fine. We'll just see what happens. Now, I turned this a little bit thick. I would have liked this to be nice and thin, but I am not familiar with this wood. I don't even know for sure what species it is. So what I didn't want to do is make this too thin and have big chunks of this top rim just breaking off. That wouldn't be any good. Now, I might sand this down the road, but for right now, I'm going to leave it like it is. This is the final pass with the bowl gouge on the outside of the surface. There you can see how beneficial the bowl gouge really is. When you're making beautiful slicing cuts with a bowl gouge, you're going to get an amazing finish that only needs a little bit of sanding, or in this case, no sanding. Now, again, there are tool marks in here, but they're very minimal and they will sand out if I decide to go that route. So you might want to check out my Bowl Gouge Mastery online course. There we go over everything you need to know to be able to use the bowl gouge properly and get finishes just like this. So check that out. All right, guys, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you have, leave me a comment. I would like to hear from you and hear what you thought of this piece. And be sure to like this video as well. I greatly appreciate that. And subscribe if you're not already subscribing. Also, be sure to check out my website, turningwoodbowl.com. Over there, I've got everything you need to know about turning wood bowls. And I've got several online courses that are going to help you kickstart your skills for turning bowls like this very quickly. So check it out, turnawoodbowl.com. All right, guys, thank you so much for watching. And as always, happy turning.